In Deltarune, there are 4 different instances of the verb making, or variations of it, being used without elaboration on what is being made. The first instance is at the ending of Chapter 2, where Queen says that the knight reached its long hand to the sky, coursed its will into its blade, and made, thrusting the fountain from the earth. That's an odd construction if there ever was one. You don't usually use the word made without it having an object. You don't usually just make, you make something. You're missing context if you don't say what you made. The third time, we're skipping the second for now, is in the prophecy, wherein it is stated, "The knight which makes with blackened knife shall duel with heroes strife by strife." Both of these passages are describing the creation of dark fountains, so it would seem at least given the prophecy's invocation of the black knife, so perhaps making just means making dark fountains. Indeed, that's the visual that is displayed whenever Queen says made. But what's the purpose of leaving that unsaid, especially since Queen says it in plain English immediately after? The word making is left hanging in these 2 instances in a way that's noticeable and awkward. It's like it was removed after the fact without the rest of the sentence being able to adjust, or even noticing. The prophecy in particular is usually quite poised and articulate. This turn of phrase, which reads like a grammatical error being here, is drawing deliberate attention to the idea of making, and forcing us to wonder what is being made that can't be said, when the good folk seem to have no problem describing the creation of dark fountains. The 4th instance of this was pointed out to me by somebody on my YouTube community page, and it occurs when speaking to the philosopher NPC in Chapter 4 who repeatedly calls you a liar, when, and only when, you have the egg but deny having it. Liar, your hands are shining, you tokened made, tickets and cards, drawn in gray, a trace, repeated. It's all so clear, though, it would be a lie if I said I understood it. This entire exchange is a reference to the egg rooms. The hand shining is potentially a reference to the graphite stain on Chris's hand which they were unable to wash away, and the tickets and cards drawn in gray line is a clear and overt reference to the Chapter 3 egg room, to man country. One potential theory is that the egg rooms represent Chris's guilt and trauma regarding the events that took place however many years ago, guilt and trauma that they can't wash away. A popular interpretation of such emotions is that Chris opened the dark world which Des got lost in. That theory is less likely than it once was given remarks in Chapter 5 about the knight being involved in, quote, a fountain a long time ago, but nothing can be ruled out. Perhaps this is just another instance of making describing making a dark fountain. It's also worth mentioning that if you truthfully deny having the egg, the NPC still finds a way to sneak the word making in there. You are safe now, but you have the makings of a liar. To speculate about such statements' meanings is to speculate about multiple of the most unknowable components of Deltarune, so you may not hear me mention it much for the rest of the video, but it should be kept in mind if you're trying to neatly map a singular explanation onto the term making, because as many explanations as there are for the other instances, there are few which also make sense in this particular context. The second instance of the word making appearing without elaboration is in the Spamton Neo boss fight in the Weird Round, where, tucked within Spamton's ramblings, is, "No, I get it. It's you and that Hochi Mama. You've been making, haven't you? You've been making Hyperlink blocked, and now that you have your own supply, you don't need me." This isn't like determination where every single time the word making pops up represents an intentional and meaningful decision, but the objectless making is not a common grammatical construction, and it appears nowhere else in Deltarune other than the places I've described. And these are all meaningful moments where we are meant to be paying attention and meant to be looking deeper into the character's statements. This doesn't seem like a writing quirk to me. This feels left for us on purpose. Spamton provides the most detail out of any of our speakers. The first time he says it, where making is emphasized and on its own, is perfectly in line with the pattern established by the other instances, where the universe seems confident that leaving making without an object is in and of itself a complete thought. Spamton follows by elaborating on what is being made, or at least attempting to, censoring his answer with Hyperlink blocked, which he uses constantly throughout Chapter 2 to censor himself, or which is potentially a censor being forced upon him. The phrase is even evoked in Chapter 4. This calls to mind the idea that whatever is being made, it is unspeakable, potentially literally. The fact that he tries to say what is being made at least does imply that something is being made, that there is a phrase or a word which hypothetically could be substituted in there. Other details we get include that Chris is specifically the one doing the making, and that they are doing it with a quote-unquote Hochi Mama, a term which is vague but which suggests a female collaborator. We know that Chris is engaging in a conspiracy with Carol Holiday, that the Weird Route's 2 central figures are them and Noelle Holiday, and that a popular candidate for the knight's identity is Des Holiday, and as a result, all are plausible candidates for who Spamton is accusing Chris of making with, whatever they're making. This could also be Susie, or it could be any other character, but whatever explanation there is to draw from this, it cannot begin and end with Chris Dreamer. I again find it interesting that at least 2 of the other times we get that isolated making, it is in the context of the knight solely and unambiguously creating dark fountains. Pairing this with that Hochi Mama comment, it could be implying that Chris is making dark fountains with a female companion, which is an idea subscribed to by multiple schools of thought even if the specifics wildly differ. But what I find most interesting about the Spamton Neo sequence is Spamton's line, "Now that you have your own supply, you don't need me." placed directly after him accusing Chris of making Hyperlink blocked with their companion. If we were to take Spamton literally here, admittedly not the safest thing to do in the world, then whatever Chris and their companion were making, it may have involved Spamton at one point. This makes me feel less confident that Dark Fountains are our answer here. What I just described doesn't map neatly on the Dark Fountains, as one reading of it is. Now that you have your own supply of Dark Fountains, you don't need me. For all the unanswered questions that exist pertaining to Spamton, there's little correlation between creating Dark Fountains and requiring anything of him. So why would he think that Chris making Dark Fountains is replacing him in some way? And what exactly would the supply be in this context? And why is this said only on the weird route when there's no more Dark Fountains created on this route than on the normal route? A theory which ends at when making is said it refers to making Dark Fountains has to propose things about Spamton that have never been proposed before. Not that it can't be done, but I won't be trying to do it today. It's also worth mentioning that Dark Fountains has never been a credible candidate for what Hyperlink blocked means, it just doesn't slot at all neatly into other uses of that term. Given that, I want to explore what else making could mean instead of just saying it means creating Dark Fountains. That doesn't seem like it's the answer in its entirety. When it comes to what Spamton has been needed for, as it pertains to Chris, it has to be said that it is only through his providing of the Thorn Ring that the Weird Route is able to take place, and it is only in the Weird Route where we encounter the dialogue I previously described. This could mean that whatever making is, it's something that is done on the Weird Route in particular, or at least something that is done to a greater extent on the Weird Route. This strengthens the idea of Noelle being that unspecified female companion Chris is making with, but does not eliminate all other candidates, especially since Noelle is referred to later in Spamton's speech as side chick, which could mean secondary to Chris's main female partner, the Hochi Mama. Attempts to answer the question of what making is inevitably intersect with previous rounds of speculation about what Hyperlink blocked in general is, as the answer to both questions may very well be the same concept, or the exact same word or phrase. Maybe it's pointless to go looking for a single word, and maybe it was a flawed methodology to connect this to the concept of Hyperlink blocked. Maybe Spamton is referring to different concepts when he says you've been making and then you've been making Hyperlink blocked, or something of the sort. It's the most natural conclusion to draw given the proximity and similar structure of these two sentences, but that's not inherently prohibitive of other explanations. Still, the connections I have laid out at least provide a new lens to approach the mystery of Hyperlink blocked from, new things to consider when deliberating candidates. If its conclusion really is our conclusion, then I think the mystery is worth revisiting, as we can now collate the two pools of evidence in hopes of generating stronger conclusions. The most common theory for what Hyperlink blocked means is love, so perhaps it's what's being left unsaid in all these instances of making. It coursed its will into its blade and made love, the knight which makes love with blackened knife. Liar, you took and made love, took and made love. You've been making love, haven't you? And now that you have your own supply, you don't need me. Love has two definitions, of course. Love, and level of violence. While this explanation maps very neatly onto Spamton's dialogue in the Weird Route, the double meaning of Chris and Noelle descending into an unhealthy relationship with uncomfortably intimate undertones while committing grave acts of violence, it's less immediately applicable to all the other instances of making. The knight has never been described as making either love or making level of violence. Neither thing is hard to imagine, though. Many interpretations of the knight portray them as a tragic figure doing what they're doing out of love. Or perhaps they're just creating fountains because doing so makes them stronger, helps them gain love. The main barrier to this is mechanically, we don't know how love works in Deltarune. Love, or at least LV, is gained in Deltarune following the accomplishment of certain meaningful tasks. This is often sealing a Dark Fountain, but doesn't have to be, as sealing multiple Dark Fountains in Chapter 4 only awards 1 LV, and in Chapter 2, Noelle gains LV without sealing a Dark Fountain, and there's even less evidence that opening Dark Fountains is in any way associated with gaining LV. Still, this is as close a connection as we may get between any of our candidates and Dark Fountains, when that connection seems to be necessitated by the constant invocations of the term making in sequences describing Dark Fountains. I've seen some interpret love as not tied to any specific action, but rather a cosmic reward for adhering to one's role in the prophecy, which explains why it only happens after climactic moments, and explains how both the Fun Gang and the Knight could be acquiring love despite engaging in diametrically opposed actions. I don't know why this process would be described as making, however. Even just generally, while making love is a common grammatical construction, if one with implications not inherently transferable to the current context, making level of violence really isn't a natural turn of phrase and not in line with how level of violence has been described in the past. The verb gained is much more commonly associated with love than made. So to the extent that love is a compelling candidate for what Hyperlink blocked means, it's an interesting but imperfect candidate for what broadly is being described in all of these instances of the isolated making. Maybe this means Hyperlink blocked and the general making aren't as related as I've been arguing they are. Maybe it diminishes love's candidacy as what Hyperlink blocked is a stand-in for. Maybe the entire premise of this conversation is flawed, but regardless, conversations about these concepts need to continue. As for other candidates for what hyperlink blocked means, like freedom, power, and determination, while these are concepts that are important to Deltarune's themes and narrative, to the extent that every time these words pop up an eyebrow has to be raised and attention has to be paid, none of them can be made in the conventional sense. And the fact that these words are just said in plain text elsewhere in the story, sometimes ad nauseum, is almost evidence against them being what is being made, because the entire point of this being notable is that Deltarune goes well out of its way to avoid saying what is being made. There are a litany of other possibilities such as making choices, making change, or any other object you can slide in there, but those feel far too general to represent substantial and profound arc words, too substantial and profound for chapters 2 and 4. Regardless, I don't want to propose a theory here so much as I want to thoroughly introduce these connections and then see what the community can make of them. I just opened a book, it'd be disingenuous for me to try and close it. I would never dare want others to think like me. I want them to think like themselves, and I view my purpose as solely giving them the tools necessary for them to do that. So, here you go. The verb making, without an object, is mentioned in the following circumstances. Queen says the knight does it when creating dark fountains. The knight is described as doing it in the prophecy. Chris is described as having done it when lying about not having the egg. Chris is accused of doing it with a female partner, right before Spamton complains that they now have their own supply of something and no longer need him. If making is just making dark fountains, then we need to take a long look at what mechanically making a dark fountain means, what the supply Spamton is referring to is, how Spamton is or was involved in making dark fountains. If making is not, or is not solely making dark fountains, there may be something else that is being made simultaneously by the knight creating dark fountains, Chris and Noelle engaging in the weird route, and Chris collecting eggs. Those three are commonly interpreted to be different journeys, all individuals involved in pursuit of different objects. But the shared motif of making is a clue strong and nebulous enough to propose that may not be the case. Strong and nebulous enough to propose that all of these actors, Chris, the Knight, Spamton, the Forgotten Man, any combination of Carol, Des, and Noelle, may be engaging in actions along more similar lines than we suspected before. May be making the same thing. May be, in whole or in part, components of the same process. I love these periods of time where we don't know what the answer is. They're special. We should appreciate them, and make the most of them. Alright, that's all. Onwards and upwards.